I vividly remembered that day, the day she went missing. I was at home. Everything felt normal. It was just a quiet, dark afternoon. I remember turning on the TV, and suddenly, there it was, all over the news. A missing girl. Her name was Giulia Cecchettin. I vividly remember her father standing in front of cameras trying to stay strong. I remember her sister and her brother. I remember her grandma. I remember that they were desperate, pleading with anyone who might know something, begging Giulia to come home. But what I truly remember, like it was yesterday, was realizing I already knew how this story would end. I remember trying to tell myself, you don't know it yet. Maybe she'll be back home any minute now. But the more I tried to believe it, the more the incessant news reports prepared not only her family, but the entire country for the worst. Giulia forced Italy to look at itself in a mirror and ask how many more women have to die before we admit that this isn't just a series of isolated tragedies. How many more women have to die before we admit that it's a cultural disease? Because we've been here before, too many times. A girl disappears, a man close to her is nowhere to be found, and deep down, we all know this isn't going to end well. Giulia Cecchettin was the 105th victim of feminicide in Italy in 2023. Her death was not an accident, not a mystery, not even an isolated act of violence. It was the consequence of a culture that still teaches women to be careful, but rarely teaches men to stop. Because in Italy, when a man kills a woman, we still often call it a moment of jealousy. Un raptus di gelosia. As if jealousy could ever explain brutality. As if love could ever justify murder. We even have a phrase for this distorted way of loving. Amore malato. Sick love. The kind that confuses control with passion and obsession with care. The numbers tell us everything we need to know. According to a 2018 national survey made by Istat on gender stereotypes, 1 in 4 men and almost the same percentage of women believed that a woman could provoke sexual violence through her clothing. Over the 7% thought that when women say no, they sometimes mean yes. And the 6% believed that serious women don't get raped. Until 1981, the Italian Penal Code still contained an article called honor killing, which stated that a man who killed his wife, daughter, or sister after discovering an illegitimate relationship could receive as little as 3 to 7 years in prison because his honor had been offended. And that is the legacy we're dealing with. A system built on patriarchy and misogyny, where women's lives have always been negotiable. And that's what makes Giulia's story not just a tragedy, but a mirror. Because this is not only the story of a girl who was killed by her ex-boyfriend. It's the story of an entire country still trying to unlearn what it once called love. But before we begin, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Martina, and welcome to the dark side of Italy. Giulia Cecchettin was 22 years old. She lived in Vigonovo, a quiet town near Venice, with her father and siblings. She unfortunately lost her mom 2 years before this tragedy happened. She loved anime, K-pop, and long voice notes with her sister Elena. She was kind, shy, and full of quiet energy. The first time I saw a picture of her, I thought, how can someone radiate so much light in just a photo? She was just days away from her graduation in biomedical engineering at the University of Padua. Her thesis was finished, her outfit ready. She was making plans for what comes next. A job, new experiences, a life that was only beginning. But she didn't know that her name, Giulia, would soon become a symbol. Because her story doesn't end with her. It speaks for all the women whose red flags were ignored, whose fears were silenced, whose love became a cage. Thousands marched for her. People filled the streets with banners saying, "Siamo tutte Giulia." We are all Giulia. Because deep down, everyone knew Giulia could have been any woman, any sister, any daughter, any friend. But the cruel truth is that it happened to her. She was the one whose life was taken, sacrificed for something she didn't even know she'd come to represent. Filippo Turetta was 22 years old, the same age as Giulia. He studied the same subject, biomedical engineering, at the same university. To everyone who knew him, he seemed polite, quiet, almost shy. A normal guy, the kind of boy whose face wouldn't make headlines. Until it did. Giulia met him during class in 2022. At first, he was charming, attentive, almost protective. He made her feel special, wanted. But very soon, what looked like affection became control. His messages grew constant, his tone possessive. He wanted to know where she was, what she was doing, who she was talking to. Giulia thought it was just insecure, that maybe he just loved her too much. But what she couldn't see yet was that this wasn't love. It was obsession, it was ownership. It was amore malato, sick love. And in Italy, this kind of sick love has a story of ending the same way, with a girl's name on the news and a country asking itself, once again, how could this happen? Giulia and Filippo officially became a couple on January 2nd, 2022. At first, it was a story like many others. Long messages, shared playlists, little literals that made the relationship feel unique. But slowly, what started as love began to suffocate Giulia. Filippo's attention became constant, then invasive. His jealousy grew louder, his need for control became absolute. He wanted to know everything, where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, even when she fell asleep. In March 2023, Giulia tried to leave him for the first time, but only 12 hours later, he was back, begging, promising that he'd changed. For a while, she gave him another chance, but by July, she knew it was over. To keep herself grounded, Giulia started writing. She made a list, a quiet act of survival. Line after line, she wrote down every reason why she needed to stay away from him. This is the complete list that Giulia wrote. He kept saying it was my duty to help him study. Got angry when I sent fewer hearts than usual. He bombarded me with messages many times a day. He has strange ideas about taking justice into his own hands after betrayals. When he wants sex, I can't say no, or he becomes insistent. He doesn't accept me going out with friends. He would never accept a trip if there were men in the group. He needs to know everything, even what I tell my friends about him. During fights, he says really cruel things. When I left him, he threatened me just to make me change my mind. After saying goodnight, he kept sending stickers to check I'd actually fallen asleep. Everything I tell him becomes a promise. He considered it an affront if I took the bus from the nearest stop instead of the main station. He once got angry because after getting off the bus, I wanted to walk 5 minutes alone while he was elsewhere. We argued because I didn't invite him to my sister's birthday. And last, generally, my personal space doesn't exist. And I think that last line sums up the reality Giulia was living in. By the fall of 2023, Giulia and Filippo's relationship had reached its breaking point. The more Giulia tried to distance herself, the more desperate he became. His messages multiplied, his tone grew harsher, his words manipulative, then threatening. He would text things like, "You haven't written all day. That's cheating. You have to pay for it. You have to make it up to me. You promised you wouldn't go out with your friends. Answer me. Where are you? Don't you care that I'm suffering? I'll kill myself." Giulia, exhausted, replied simply, "Leave me alone." She knew it was getting worse. In one of her last texts, she admitted, "You control me. You scare me." Filippo, meanwhile, was losing control, or perhaps planning not to. In early November, his behavior shifted from desperation to calculation. On November the 7th, Filippo started bombing Giulia with messages again because she refused to keep their good night text ritual. While he was sending those messages, he was also writing a list on his phone. A meticulous plan. It read: map, big backpack, knives, full tank of gas, cash withdrawal, duct tape, rope, Swiss Army knife, garbage bags, cloth, wet sock, tape her mouth, tie ankles below and above knees, block the car doors, shovel, silence her with the knife, mask, GPS tracker, last seen app. This wasn't the list of a man in despair. It was the list of a man preparing for something. On November the 8th, their text continued. Filippo accused Giulia of chatting with another guy, of hiding her last seen status on WhatsApp. He called her manipulative. She finally snapped and wrote back, "You are sick." But still, he kept going. The next day, November the 9th, he downloaded a VPN and the Last Seen app to keep monitoring when she was online. When Giulia noticed, she gave in again, just to stop the constant pressure. "Fine, I'll put back the last scene," she wrote. "But after graduation, I'll do whatever I want, and you won't bother me again." The same day, Filippo withdrew 200 euros in cash, his only withdrawal that year, and began searching online for new ways to control her life. He Googled how to see if your friend has started following someone on Instagram. On Friday, November the 10th, his research took a darker turn. He searched super strong duct tape, extra resistant tape, where to buy handcuffs. He bought 2 rolls of duct tape and a map of Italy. Prosecutors later said he was planning to disable his car's GPS to avoid being tracked. That evening, Giulia went to Padova to visit the restaurant where she'd celebrate her graduation the following week. Filippo showed up there too, following her every move. Late that night, he was on Google Maps, looking up mountain trails, waterfalls, gorges, isolated places. He deleted the searches afterward. However, investigators would later recover them. The morning of Saturday, November the 11th, Giulia received yet another flood of messages. Filippo wrote that he couldn't live without her, that he was sick, that he couldn't eat or sleep. Giulia answered for the last time. I know, I'm sure of it, 100%, but I don't have any feelings for you anymore, Pippo. That morning, he Googled again, how to stop the car windows from fogging up. Around 5 p.m., he drove to Amazon Locker to pick up his orders, the same one listed in his note, and then went to Giulia's house to pick her up. At 5:50 p.m., surveillance cameras captured them entering the mall. They walked around for hours. Giulia tried on dresses for her graduation ceremony while sending photos of them tried on to her sister. In the surveillance footage, Filippo can be seen repeatedly telling her not to use her phone. At 9:02 p.m., Giulia even paid for their meal. At 10:44 p.m., Filippo's black Fiat Grande Punto left the parking lot. That was the last time Giulia was seen alive. It's November the 11th, 2023, Saturday night. Giulia and Filippo leave the mall at 10:44 p.m. in his black Fiat Grande Punto. They drive through the dark, quiet streets of Viganovo, not far from Giulia's home. It should have been an ordinary drive, but it wasn't. At 11:18 p.m., a man living in an industrial area of Fossò, just a few hundred meters from Giulia's house, looks out from his balcony. He sees a man beating a young woman outside a car. Violently, punching, kicking, shouting. He can't intervene, it all happens too fast. He calls 112, the Italian emergency number, and gives the police the model of the car, a black Fiat Grande Punto. But no patrol is ever sent. No one goes looking for that car. That silence became part of the crime itself. When investigators later return to that exact spot, they find blood on the asphalt, a broken knife handle, and the blade lying nearby. They find a bloody footprint, a single shoe print. Forensic tests confirm the blood was Giulia's. The knife matched some of the wounds later found during the autopsy. The evidence tells a brutal story. Giulia tried to escape. She ran, he caught her, he forced her back into the car. Private surveillance cameras from nearby factories captured the next moments. Filippo's car driving past at 11:39 p.m. Then again, a minute later, a blurry figure is seen running, chased by another. The second figure tackles the first to the ground, pins them down, and moves their arm repeatedly, like a stabbing motion. Moments later, the attacker returns to the car, opens the trunk, lifts something or someone, and loads it inside. On the ground, more blood, pieces of duct tape, the same kind he'd searched for online. 2 attacks, one in Viganovo, one in Fossò. After the first, He tried to restrain her with tape. After the second, there was no longer anything to restrain. For the police, the scene is now clear. But that night, Giulia's family still hopes. At 1:30 p.m. the next day, her father, Giulia Cecchettin, walks into the Carabinieri station in Vigonovo to file a missing person report. Minutes later, Filippo's parents do the same for their son. Both of their phones are already turned off. What happened that night wasn't an argument gone wrong. It was the culmination of months of control, obsession, and fear. And from that moment on, it became a chase, one that would take investigators outside of Italy. From that night on, Filippo Turetta is on the run. Cameras trace his car as it leaves Fossò, heading north through Venice, then Treviso, then Pordenone. At some point, he reaches Piancavallo, a remote mountain area, and disappears for 2 hours. When the car reappears, it's driving through Belluno, then Cortina d'Ampezzo, moving higher into the Alps. At 8:50 a.m., he stops for gas. At 9:32, he drives away again. Soon after, he crosses into the province of Bolzano, and then the Austrian border. From that moment, his route becomes impossible to follow precisely. On November the 12th, Italian authorities issue a red notice through Interpol, an international request for his arrest and extradition. Investigators believe he is somewhere between Austria and Germany. Days pass, the search continues, and then, 1 week later, the mountains give their answer. On November the 18th, 2 volunteers from a canine rescue unit find a black plastic bag near a rocky slope by Lake Barcis, in the province of Pordenone. Inside, they found Giulia. She had been covered with trash bags hidden under a rock ledge. Beside her body lay a children's book. Even monsters brushed their teeth. It was the same book he had given her as a gift that day. The autopsy confirms she had been stabbed 75 times with 2 different knives at 2 separate moments. She fought back. There were deep defensive wounds on her arms and hands. The fatal one was to her neck. That same night, at 10:58 p.m., a German highway patrol spots a black Fiat Grande Punto parked with its light off on the side of the Autobahn, near Munich. They approach. The driver says in broken English, "I killed my girlfriend." He's trembling. He starts eating his neck with his hand, repeating, "My girlfriend is killing." The officers arrest him on the spot. Inside the car, his clothes, still stained with Giulia's blood. No phone, no laptop, no murder weapon. He had gotten rid of everything, even the map he'd used to plan his route. Only a new, unused knife remains. Even in his escape, he had prepared for another act. The car is almost out of fuel. His flight and Giulia's story both end there, on a cold German road. After a week in Germany, Filippo Turetta is extradited to Italy. On November the 25th, he arrives at the Verona prison. A week later, on December the 1st, he's questioned by prosecutor Andrea Pretoni. That's when he finally confesses. He begins his statement saying that being with Giulia had made him very happy. He describes what he calls a perfect relationship, one that, in his mind, revolved entirely around his own pain, his needs, his despair. In his version of the story, Giulia barely exists. She's not a person. She's a function, a mirror for his emotions. He says he used his own suffering to manipulate her into staying. He says that on the night of November the 11th, he brought her gifts. A stuffed toy, a small lamp, and that illustrated children's book found beside her body. He claims that when Giulia told him she was seeing someone else, he snapped. He says, "I was very angry. I didn't want her to go away. I got out of the car, and before I did, I took a knife." Then, trying to soften what he's done, he insists he only hit her once, on the arm. That she fell, that it wasn't premeditated. He tells investigators that she screamed, that she tried to get away, that he only wanted to silence her. His story is full of half-truths, or worse, self-pity disguised as remorse. He says that after killing her, he drove aimlessly through the mountains, trying to find a place both to hide her body and to end his own life. But, as he admits, "I'm not very brave. I kept postponing it, saying I'd do it the next day." He never did. When the trial opens in Venice on September the 23rd, 2024, the charges are overwhelming. Premeditated murder, aggravated by cruelty and by an emotional relationship with the victim. Stalking, kidnapping, carrying weapons, and concealment of a body. Turetta's defense takes what's called a minimalist strategy. They admit everything, but insist it wasn't planned. They ask for compassion, claiming he was just a good boy, a first-time offender, overwhelmed by emotion, blinded by love. They deny premeditation. They try to frame the killing as a moment of madness. But the prosecution has his list, his searches, his purchases, his deleted maps. Every detail screams planning. In the end, the court finds him guilty of murder with premeditation, but excludes the aggravation factor of cruelty. According to the judge, Filippo was inexperienced, not fully aware that his actions were cruel. 75 stab wounds, and not aware of cruelty. It's a phrase that shook Italy, because even though legally the exclusion didn't change the length of the sentence, morally it changed everything. Turetta is sentenced to life imprisonment, called ergastolo. In Italy, that doesn't mean what it sounds like. A life sentence here isn't forever. After 10 years, an inmate can apply for temporary leave, up to 15 consecutive days to 45 in total per year. After 20 years, they can request semi-liberty, permission to work or study outside the prison during the day. And after 26 years, they can ask for conditional release if they've shown good behavior and are considered no longer dangerous. So even with a life sentence, Filippo Turetta might one day walk free. Maybe in his 50s, maybe while Giulia's father is still alive to see it. When the trial ended, Italy did what it always does. It watched, it mourned, and then it argued. Was it love? Was it madness? Was it preventable? Words like raptus di gelosia, a fit of jealousy, fill the headlines again, as if that phrase could still soften a murder. But this wasn't a raptus. It wasn't sudden or impulsive or unpredictable. It was the result of a culture that normalizes control, excuses jealousy, and romanticizes possession. A culture where men are taught that losing a woman means losing themselves, and women are thought that saving him might save the relationship. Because in Italy, violence against women is just not individual, it's systemic. It's in the language we use, in the jokes we still laugh at, in the way we raise boys to believe they have right to be obeyed, and girls to believe that love means endurance. To ending this episode, I want to give voice to Giulia's sister, Elena. Turetta is often labeled as a monster, but he is not. A monster is an exception, someone outside society, someone society need to take responsibility for. And yet, the responsibility is real. The so-called monsters are not ill. They are healthy sons of patriarchy, of rape culture. Femicide is a state murder because the state does not protect us, because the state does not safeguard us. Feminicide is not a crime of passion, it is a crime of power. We need extensive education in sexuality and emotions. We must teach that love is not possession. We must fund anti-violence centers and make it possible to ask for help. For Giulia, don't do a minute of silence. Burn everything.